It is my pleasure to introduce Alex Kotlowitz, whose nonfiction has truly changed the way many readers see this city and this country. At Columbia, or at least in the nonfiction writing program in the English department where I teach, we like to tell students that they can create change. What we don't always tell students is that change can start at a cattle ranch. It so happens that our speaker's first job out of college was at a cattle ranch in Oregon. It also so happens that Alex Kotlowitz and I were both raised in New York, and I can say with total authority, that for anyone raised in New York City, spending significant time on a ranch is a sign of bravery, a sign of willingness to go to places that a lot of people you know would never, ever go to. I can hear the legacy of that cattle ranch in Kotlowitz's writing, that same bravery, curiosity, and deep interest in lesser-told stories, especially the stories that come from places that many of us don't know much about or are too scared to go to. That's what marks Alex Kotlowitz's writing. In There Are No Children Here, which is a beautiful book, Kotlowitz follows two brothers, and he shows their struggle to stay alive in a Chicago neighborhood plagued by violence. The book makes us rethink who we are and what America really is. More recently, I read a beautiful feature essay that Alex wrote in the New York Times Magazine. It's called All Boarded Up, and I urge all of you to read it. Kotlowitz chronicles how a Cleveland politician and a Cleveland judge are fighting, or shall we just say wrangling, their way through the tidal waves of vacant homes in that city. Here again, Alex Kotlowitz is writing about America and America's soul. With Alex Kotlowitz, we always want to know what's next. We know that he's willing to check out boarded up homes, forgotten neighborhoods, and even ranches to show us what the soul of this nation is. He's working on a documentary next, and I know that I, for one, cannot wait to see it. Please join me in welcoming Alex Kotlowitz, our distinguished honoree.
Well, good morning. What Avia didn't tell you is that I've got a very healthy fear of horses. And so in the cattle ranch, when we go out and round up the cattle, the cowboys, the real cowboys would be standing on the side or sitting on the side on their horses, guffawing as I was galloping on my horse, holding on with both hands to the horn of the saddle. President Carter, trustees, faculty, and of course, graduates, thank you for this honor. You know, before I begin my remarks, I've got to tip my hat to you. The Great Convergence Friday night and marching into Aerosmith, now that takes some of the pomp out of the circumstance. Shoot, I had so much fun Friday, I'll be at Manifest next year. You guys know how to throw a good party. When I was just a couple of years younger than you, a sophomore in college, I realized something was missing. I'd gone off to college thinking I wanted to be a biologist, and then I made the mistake of taking organic chemistry. And I and the periodic chart didn't mix very well. So I dropped out of school for a while. And when I returned, I was admittedly a bit lost. I floundered for a while, and then on a Sunday afternoon, for a class on American labor history, We visited with the Machinists Union at the local Pratt & Whitney plant where they made aircraft engines. And the head of the union who spoke to us was this guy named Connie Tyak. Now, Connie wore his hair slicked back. He wore these polyester shirts unbuttoned. He wore a nylon jacket with the union's logo on the back. He wore shoes that looked like they belonged in a bowling alley. He was pretty unhip, except that he drove a Ford Thunderbird convertible, which to a kid from New York City, from a family that never owned a car, seemed pretty darn cool. And so over the next couple of years, my education was sitting alongside Connie in his Thunderbird, the top down, zipping along the Connecticut River. He talked about class, about work, about politics, about family, and I listened. Connie, who was also a city councilman, got the mayor. He thought it'd be a good idea for me to get involved in local politics, and so he got the mayor to appoint me to a local board that decided how to spend these federal monies that were set aside for the poor. And a couple of months into my tenure, we were asked to use some of these monies to widen a street which just happened to run alongside a bank owned by the mayor's cousin. Well, that didn't seem right to me, and so I opposed it. And the mayor, in a fit of fury, kicked me off the board. I was completely distraught. Connie was laughing, and he talked to me about power and how good judgment doesn't necessarily preside with those in positions of authority. The two, power and good judgment, he told me over and over, don't necessarily go hand in hand. He taught me something also I've always remembered, that often the clearest perspective comes not from those on the inside, but from those looking in from the outside. And I have no doubt that that's part of what eventually pushed me into journalism. I've lost touch with Connie over the years, but I'm forever grateful for his friendship, for his guidance, for his nourishment. He didn't have to take me under his wings. I mean, here I was, a skinny, long-haired kid with soft hands from New York City, attending this high-class university. It would have been easy, I suppose, for Connie to have stereotyped me, to think he knew who I was. But he didn't. Instead, he passed along what knowledge and wisdom he could, knowing, I suspect, that I'd find a way to use it. We spend much of our lives chasing wisdom, looking for it, trying to figure out who in fact has it and who doesn't. What do I mean by wisdom? Well, I think it's pretty simple. It's knowing what is right and just, knowing how to live with honor and with dignity. Before I met Connie, I figured anyone older than 20 didn't know beans. How could they? They'd already gone on and made all these mistakes in life. What I didn't realize is that those mistakes awaited me as well. Moving in with a possessive girlfriend who also happened to own a shotgun. That was a mistake. Penning an article about a corrupt ambulance company without really having the goods. Thinking that Jimmy Carter would make a great president. Now I'm 55, and I realize I don't know beans. I've had a great journey so far. Cattle rancher, truck driver, journalist, author, filmmaker, father, husband. But what I've come to realize is that I need guidance. Still do. Life is a journey best made not alone. I've had the good fortune over the years through my work as a writer to get to know individuals whose experiences, whose perspectives, whose advice has helped me navigate the world. Afaf Ahmed, a refugee from Sudan, Don Sharp, a Baptist minister on the city's south side, Pharaoh and Lafayette, two brothers who grew up in the projects, Ed Sadlowski, a retired steelworker, Brenda Stevenson, who works with teenage moms on the west side, and of course, Connie Tyak. In each of them, I found inspiration, in words and in deeds. I carry their lives with me. Take Brenda Stevenson. Brenda grew up in Rockwell Gardens, which was one of the most violent housing projects in the city, and I met her 20 years ago when I was working on my first book, There Are No Children Here. She was working with young teenage moms, and I think of her as a kind of professional busybody. She would go meet these young moms, and peppered among these mundane questions like, do you have enough diapers? Are you breastfeeding? She'd ask stuff she had no business asking. Are you drinking? What's your boyfriend like? Are you having unprotected sex? And the thing about it is, these young moms would confide in her as if she was an old friend. Well, every few months, Brenda, her best friend Millie, and I go out for lunch. And one afternoon a few years back, we were having lunch at Edna's, a soul food restaurant on the city's west side. And as we were sitting there eating our lunch, two men, both quite handsome, dressed in these bright-colored suits, one of them with a fedora pulled down over his eyes, it turns out he was a minister, sidled up to Brenda and Millie and began to flirt with them. They completely ignored me. Now, I should tell you, Brenda and Millie are accustomed to wearing these very tight-fitting dresses, and I can understand why these guys wanted to come by and get to know them. They kept up the banter, and eventually they slid into the booth, pushing me up against the wall. It was as if I didn't exist. They talked about how fine Brenda and Millie looked. How about dinner, they asked. Well, Brenda and Millie weren't interested, to say the least. And at one point, Brenda pointed to me and told these gentlemen, "We're with him." The two men looked at me. They seemed perplexed, as if to say, "With him?" They weren't exactly laughing, though I got to tell you, it felt like they were on the verge. Brenda then made it clear that they needed to leave, which they reluctantly did. Well, once they were out of earshot, Brenda turned to me and admonished me. "Don't you ever do that again," she said. "Do what?" I asked. "Do nothing," she said. "Next time, you just tell them you got us covered." I know this is a rather small incident, but I got to tell you, it stayed with me. In essence, Brenda was telling me, hey, the worst thing you can do is not say anything. There's complicity, she was telling me, in silence. If you find yourself sliding or getting pushed into that corner, trying to disappear, trying not to be noticed, know that in your silence you concur with what is and have lost the ability to imagine what could be. So if I could pass along one piece of wisdom, it would be just that. Find your voice. In silence, we stand alone. In silence, we forfeit our place at the table. In silence, we give in. I look out over the vast landscape of this country, and I see things which don't feel right, which don't feel just. There's a 13-year-old boy I met from the city's west side who, frustrated because he wasn't learning how to read, enrolled himself at school in nearby Oak Park, only to get kicked out and told he had to return to his troubled Chicago public school. I know a hard-working Latino woman who was fired from her job where she worked for 14 years because she didn't have papers. I know a Kurd from Turkey who the government claims is a terrorist, not because of anything he's done in the 20 years he's been in this country, but because he stood up for Kurdish rights in Turkey. And in each of these situations, the boy from the West Side, who incidentally is now a student here at Columbia, the Latino woman, the Kurd from Turkey, what has given them hope, what has given them promise, is the intervention of others. Others who stood tall in an otherwise slumping world, others who refused to remain silent. I was fortunate enough to get to know Paul Simon, not the singer, but the former US Senator, and we'd have lunch periodically when he was through Chicago. And he was one of those rare politicians who was characterized by his humility. And he liked to tell the story, which he would tell over and over again, of Elijah Lovejoy. And it's a story I carry around in my back pocket. Elijah Lovejoy was a newspaper publisher in a small rural Illinois town during the first half of the 19th century. He was an abolitionist, and his anti-slavery editorials so discomforted the good citizens of Alton that they asked him to refrain from his writings because, they wrote Lovejoy, his abolitionist editorials have a tendency to disturb the quiet of our citizens and neighbors. Well, that didn't sit well with Lovejoy, and he took on not his political opponents, for he knew where they stood, but rather the decent, honorable people who remained silent. Lovejoy took to task not those who opposed his views, but rather those who had the temerity to question his right to speak his mind. At a community gathering, Lovejoy told his neighbors and friends, and I quote, "I know that I have the right freely to speak and publish my sentiments. What I wish to know of you is whether you will protect me in the exercise of this right." 3 days later, Elijah Lovejoy was shot and killed by a mob as he tried to protect his printing press from being set afire. In his final days, what so distressed Lovejoy was not those who opposed his abolitionist views, but rather those who remained silent, those who refused to take a stand. Paul Simon told me that story for a reason, because he recognized the necessity to make your presence felt, to give voice to that which isn't right, and he wanted to pass that small piece of wisdom along to me and to others. On the city's south side, there's an expression, a directive really, and it goes like this: fill in the dash. It's a reference to the dash on a tombstone between the year of birth and the year of death. And what it means is rather simple: live life fully, have a presence, leave a mark, find your voice. So graduates of 2010, my parting piece of wisdom I'd like to depart via the South Side is fill in the dash. And if you're ever out with Brenda and Millie, just tell them I got you covered. Graduates, congratulations, and now go out and fill in the dash. Thank you. Thanks, guys.